Good morning, everyone. I will be reporting measures of specific intellectual abilities. The topics are critical thinking and music or art appreciation. The main human abilities that can be thought of as influencing a person's intellect are too numerous to be sampled by the many widely used tests of general intelligence. The more popular assessments of intellectual functioning do not directly examine a wide range of intellectual abilities and aptitude. For instance, there are examinations that can be used to evaluate extremely specialized skills like critical thinking, music, or art appreciation. In order to create a sound judgment, critical thinking needs you to objectively analyze and evaluate the facts. It is the cornerstone of evidence based reasoning, and psychology relies heavily on the creation of such arguments. It is also a form of directed problem focused thinking in which the individual tests ideas or possible solutions for errors or drawbacks. It is essential to such activities as examining the validity of a hypothesis or interpreting the meaning of research results. So, the goal of assessing critical thinking training is to improve the teaching of discipline based thinking in historical, biological, sociological, and mathematical. This will help students become more adept at employing disciplined competence in reasoning to think through content. We can design education with that specific goal in mind, the better. We can be specific about what we want students to learn about critical thinking. The best way to gauge critical thinking is to utilize a validated critical thinking skills test to gauge how well someone can solve issues and make decisions, as well as a critical thinking mindset test to gauge how willing they are to apply their critical thinking abilities when they are needed. If we lack the ability to think critically, we may be led astray and assume that an argument is compelling even though there is scant evidence to back it up. Therefore, developing critical thinking abilities include being able to formulate a coherent, convincing argument, analyze and synthesize the facts at hand, and draw conclusions and assumptions. Ability to analyze data and reach logical conclusions is another aspect of critical thinking skills. Having the skill to interpret a situation and correctly infer that a problem exists would not be sufficient if we then cannot analyze why the problem continues to exist and then explain and evaluate our attempts to solve the problem. Interpretation, inference, analysis, explanation, and evaluation are all critical thinking skills. So, a valid and reliable assessment of an individual's critical thinking skills must challenge the individual to demonstrate all of these skills over a range of difficult problem situations that is collaborated to match the level of their decision responsibility. In here, we have a list of critical thinking reasoning tests in the market at present, which candidates may be likely to encounter for recruitment, selection, or development. First is the Watson Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal. It is the most widely used critical reasoning test on the market. And the next is the Cornell Critical Thinking Assessment, which is a test primarily used in education settings. The Watson Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal is a pre employment test used primarily in the law industry. The WGCTA is available from Talent Lens, that by far the most popular kind of critical thinking test. Since it measures critical thinking, the Watson Glaser is one of the most important instruments for assessing cognitive ability in professionals. It is regarded as an effective measure for predicting job success and used to choose competent managers and identify potential future leaders. In particular, for professionals in the law, it is utilized to choose the best candidate for a position. This test was originally developed by Goodwin Watson and Edward Glaser. The measures that the critical skills that are necessary for presenting in a clear, structured, well reasoning way is a certain point of view and convincing others of your argument. The test questions are looking at the individual's ability to make correct inferences, to recognize assumptions, to make deductions, to come to conclusions, and to interpret and evaluate arguments. Those were also the 5 sections designed in order to find out how good an individual is at reasoning analytically and logically. We have here the assumptions. What you can see is the example. It is composed of 12 questions, and It is issued with another statement to assess and then given a number of assumptions related to that statement. You then need to deduce whether assumptions have or have not been made. In these questions, a statement will be presented and the candidate will have to decide if an assumption has been made in making the statement. For example, in the statement, only people earning a high salary can afford a fast car, it is assumed that fast cars cost more than not fast cars. This is just one of many assumptions implicit in this statement. An assumption is something someone effectively takes for granted. Statements are given for the individual to read and they are then followed by several proposed assumptions, and the candidate has to select whether an assumption has or has not been made. The other is analyzing arguments. From the information provided, we must be able to decide whether the argument presented is a strong one or a weak one. Candidates will be provided with a given scenario example. Should the government pay students tuition fees? They are subsequently provided with a list of arguments for or against the scenario presented. The candidate will need to assess if each argument is strong or weak based on how relevant it is and how well it addresses the question. The argument is considered to be strong if it directly relates to the question or statement and weak if it is not directly related to the question or statement. The next one is deductions. We are presented with a passage and a series of proposed conclusions to the passage. You will need to determine whether the conclusion follows or doesn't follow the information contained in the passage. Candidates will be provided with a passage of information and candidates will need to evaluate a list of deductions made based on that passage. If one cannot deduce a particular statement from the passage, then that deduction does not follow and the candidate must select which deductions follow and which do not follow. The answer must be entirely based on the statements made and not on conclusions made from one's own knowledge. The other is inferences. Test questions are focused on a single statement that you must assume is true. You are not able to use any outside knowledge to influence your answer, and the single statement is then followed by a series of inferences relating to it, which you will be required to label either true or false. In this section, candidates will be provided with a passage of information on a scenario. A subsequent list of possible inferences will follow, and candidates will be asked to rate if they are true, false, possibly false, or whether it is not possible to say based on the information in the passage. The last is interpreting information. We are presented with a passage in which you assume everything to be true. You must then determine the level of importance of the information provided and apply it logically, analyzing whether or not the conclusion follows. A paragraph of information will be provided to the candidate and with a list of possible conclusions. Candidates will need to interpret the information in the paragraph and decide if each conclusion follows based on the presented information. Once again, the decisions must solely be based on the information given. WGCTA has been developed on the foundation of Pearson's Red critical thinking model. The first one is recognize assumptions. This is all about comprehension, actually understanding what is being stated and considering whether the information presented is true and whether any evidence has been provided to back it up. Correctly identifying when assumptions have been made is an essential part of this, and being able to critically consider the validity of these assumptions, ideally from a number of different perspectives, can help identify missing information or logical inconsistencies. The next one is evaluate arguments. This skill is about the systematic analysis of the evidence and arguments provided, being able to remain objective while logically working through arguments and information. Critical evaluation of arguments requires an individual to suspend their judgment, which can be challenging when an argument has an emotional impact. It is also too easy to unconsciously seek information which confirms a preferred perspective rather than critically analyze all of the information. The last one is draw conclusions. This is the ability to pull together a range of information and arrive at a logical conclusion based on the evidence. An individual with strong critical thinking skills will be able to adjust their conclusion should further evidence emerge, which leads to a different conclusion. The other one that measures critical thinking is the Cornell Critical Thinking Assessment. The CCTT is designed to assess students' reasoning ability. The assessment spans five subscales: induction, deduction, observation, credibility, and assumptions. The Cornell Critical Thinking Test is an exam that helps teachers to determine the critical thinking abilities of their students. First developed in 1985 by Robert Annis of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and Jason Nealman of Cornell University. The Cornell Critical Thinking Test series offers two levels of testing: Level X for grades 5 through 9 and Level Z for grades 10 through 12. The test may also be used at the college level as well. The following measures of specific intellectual abilities in music or art appreciation is the Seashore measure of musical talents for the music and the Mirror Art Judgment Test for the arts. Seashore measure of musical talents, a set of measures devised by the U.S. ecologist Carl Seashore of 1866 to 1949 and discussed in his book The Psychology of Musical Talent. They involve controlled procedures for measuring the respondent's ability to discriminate pitch, loudness, tempo, timbre, and rhythm, also called the Seashore test of musical ability. But Seashore himself deliberately avoided the word test and preferred measures, which he thought better captured their character as standardized laboratory procedures. The last one is the Mirror Art Judgment Test. This exam is a result of 6 years of meticulous research into the creation of an objective gauge of artistic talent. It is intended to help identify promising talent and minimize wasted effort. Here, art talent is viewed as a generic capacity ability complex made up at least 20 characteristics and elements. The Mirror Art Test replaced the Mirror Seashore Art Judgment Test and was designed to measure variation in aesthetic response, judgment, perception, and imagination, all of which have significant importance for a career in the arts. In here, there was no time limit given, but based on the test conducted before, most participants took about 45 minutes to complete it. It was comprised of 100 images and pairs of images. Reliability was determined using split half measures, producing scores ranging from 0.70 to 0.84, and the highest reliability was found in a group of students at the Rhode Island School of Design as demonstrated in the examiner's manual. It was designed to measure aesthetic judgment in terms of the capacity to sense organization in an artwork. The appearance of this test book marks the introduction of scientific procedure into a new field, namely that of analysis and measurement of art talent.